Hi, everybody. Welcome back. And I wanted to expand some thoughts on the proposed merger between Capital One and Discover, because the more I've been thinking about it, the less I think it makes significant sense or great sense for Capital One. And I don't mean to say this like a contrarian or a Capital One fanboy or somebody who thinks that Capital One is the bee's knees. If you've seen, I did a video at the tail end of last year that I was looking to end my relationship completely with Capital One, right? So I'm not trying to look at this as a Capital One hater. I'm not trying to look at this as anything other than just looking at it as objectively as I can, right? So when we think about the deal, it's an all-stock deal. So really, if things pan out for Capital One, they have nowhere to go but up. But if things don't pan out, they're going to take a significant hit on their stock and potentially produce big but maybe not devastating losses if things don't go well. So when the net positives of the deal have come out, it's things like they're getting their own payment processing network now. The payment processing network is definitely a huge and big and potentially positive deal. However, it feels like a lot of the thoughts on this are, well, if they just have a payment processing network, that's great. But I think they're making a bet on the Durbin-Marshall Bill eventually passing, and that being the big boon for them to be able to cross-sell to cards like from Chase or from Chase or Citi, the big Visa and MasterCard holders, or Bank of America, and be able to create that piggybacking network effect, right? And that would be an easy way to make a good amount of money and give back to the shareholders. But if that bill doesn't pass, now Capital One has a payment processing network that is in the United States and is known in the United States, but outside of the United States, it doesn't have significant mind share or usefulness. Like I've seen Halby has mentioned that he went to Canada and there was hardly any mention of Discover as a payment option, right? If you go internationally and Discover's not a payment option for you, you've got to use one of your other cards. So Capital One will then have to take significant cash and build out that payment processing network internationally if their longest term goal is to put all of their cards on their network so that they don't have to worry about paying royalties or paying fees to American Express or Visa, which would save them significant money. But in that world, they've got to spend a lot of time and a lot of money building out that payment processing network in the US, which is pretty well saturated for Discover. But, Canada, Mexico, Central America, Europe, Asia, if they're looking to make this an international brand, they're going to have to spend significantly to do that. So in one version of things where Durbin-Marshall passes, they get immediate money and immediate turnaround and immediate good return on investment by being positioning themselves as that first or second choice for the world to turn to, because Discover and American Express are conveniently made to be like those first secondary network options. Now, I don't know that the Targets and Walmarts of the world that are pushing for this bill want that, but it would be the quickest and easiest loop for the Chases and Citis and Wells Fargos and Banks of America of the world to just go to Discover or go to American Express. And depending on the type of card in that universe, something like Chase Sapphire Reserve is going to go to American Express, whereas, the Freedom Unlimited may go to Discover, which could, again, work out very well for Capital One. But that's a big bet. Now, in a world where Durbin-Marshall doesn't happen, how much money does Capital One then have to spend investing in building out this payment processing network over how many years? And then after they build out that payment processing network, what do they then do with it, right? It's one thing to get it built out and recognized internationally, but now to kind of start realizing some of the money spent there, you'd be moving your biggest cards onto that network and placing a big bet on yourself. Now, it works out for American Express, but then it's a question of what your interchange fees would look like going forward from there. So I don't know that it's necessarily the home run people think that it will be. And that's just on the payment processing network, right? Discover is a great brand for building your credit. Discover is a great brand for rebuilding your credit. Discover has amazing customer service from what I'm told. Discover is not necessarily a well-known entity beyond being great for those new to credit and being great for those looking to rebuild credit, right? There's not a whole lot of the population that I can think of that only run on Discover cards or are past a point where they can move past Discover and are choosing to stay with Discover for X, Y, and Z reasons. Now, I'm not saying this population is zero, but I will say this population is not profitable. How about that? And then a lot of other borrowers with Discover are folks who are also the same major target of Capital One folks. These are, subprime lenders, folks who may end up having to pay significant interest, and given the interest on Capital One Discover cards, yeah, that's easy money, but that's not helping the borrower. So you're bringing in a lot of risky clients, new customers, who you already manage, so you have expertise there. So it works out there, and that is a certain positive. But you're adding substantial risk. So I don't know that that's necessarily the thing that Capital One needs long term, right? And they've said that they're going to keep the brand separate, which is fine, and it actually makes a fair amount of sense because then you can move those subprime folks on Capital One over to the Discover brand, which makes sense. And you can keep the Ventures and Saver cards and the Capital One brand being now a more premium brand because they can move some of those cards that were subprime focused, the Quicksilver 1, the Quicksilver for good credit, the Quicksilver for fair credit, the Saver 1 for good credit, the Saver 1 for fair credit, the Venture 1, the Capital One Venture 1 for good credit card. Those can all move to the Discover network. Those can all become cards on the Discover network. And then those the Discover cards that would line up somewhat equally, like the Discover Chrome card and the Discover Miles card, could easily also become, Venture and Quicksilver cards and match their point earning or cashback earning potential. I don't know if Capital One is willing to take on the cashback match that Discover does. I'm sure they'll run it for a while just to keep up appearances, so to speak, but I don't know that long term that's something they'll want to do. So that could be brought into question. Hopefully Discover's customer service can take over for Capital One customer service, just because that is definitely a big competency of Discover. But I'm left wondering, does this really make the sense that we think it does? And it only really makes sense to me in a world where Durbin-Marshall is going to pass, in a world where it pass and become law, in a world where Capital One could then subsidize building out their network without having to use their money to do it, to build out this payment processing network to continue to provide competition, even though they wouldn't necessarily be providing competition because Discover and American Express can just be used by the bigger banks on their cards to piggyback and give that network choice effect. So, yeah, I just don't know that this deal makes the sort of sense that folks think it does. Now, I've just been rambling now for close to 10 minutes on it, but I did just want to present a different perspective on this because it's one of those things where if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And I'm not sure it looks too good to be true, but I think there's more understated risk to Capital One than has been mentioned, because when I did the rumor video on it, I was like, okay, so what does Capital One get out of this? They get a payment processor, they get a good number of customers, and they get to move the Discover It card from being a Discover cashback card over to like a Venture earning miles card, which they still could do, right? But really, the payment processor doesn't even have the mind share of American Express. Doesn't have the practicality of American Express going outside of the US. And what does Capital One want to do there? Do they want to build out this payment processor, which is going to take time and money, not provide significant returns until that payment processing network is built out internationally, and then they can move all of their cards over to it, which would then take sort of a brand hit because now people who would be used to 10, 15 years with the Venture X and the Visa Infinite benefits there, does also build up their own personal benefits network to match what Visa Infinite does for them. That I don't know. So, yeah, I think there's more risk here than is currently being mentioned. And I don't know that Capital One is necessarily not thinking about it. But I'm not sure how much of that has been baked into, this deal going through. Because without a significant change in payment processing, forced payment processing collection with Durbin-Marshall, you've got a known brand domestically that doesn't have a whole lot of room for growth domestically that you've got to now spend to take it internationally. And I don't know that they're going to. But anyway, I don't know. I just wanted to get some thoughts out there. This is one of my more, I don't know. But wanted to get these thoughts out and just see what you guys think as well. But I do think that this deal should be a little bit more, just because the logistics of it don't make the sense that I initially thought they did. And I don't know how much of a benefit to consumers it will be, and even how much of a benefit to Capital One shareholders it will be. Anyway, that's it for this one. This is going to have some serious cuts in it, and I apologize, but yeah, just wanted to get these thoughts out here. If you like what I do, hit subscribe. Thank you for continuing to build out this little community we're carving here. If you like these videos, hit the like button as well. Share down below what you think about the proposed Capital One Discover deal, but I do think there's more red flags for Capital One than I initially thought that there would be. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.